everyone. Good morning. So I am very happy to be here and thank you for coming to my talk. I'm going to talk today about how we build games at Episod Studio that tell true, important and very complex stories. But before I go on and talk about games and game design, I want to stop a bit in stories. So stories accompany our evolution. They start from our ancestors who were drawing in their caves to describe how they were spending their days, but also to then communicate their existence with us centuries and millennia later. Stories continue with the Greek and Roman gods that were reigning over us as a way for us to understand different natural phenomena like the rains and the storms and the sky and the sun. And then we have the contradicting stories about our place in the universe, some of them coming from religious figures and some of them coming from science. The historian Yuval Noah Harari says that stories exist as a fictional layer on top of our physical world. And my favorite fictional story is the story of modern states. I am from Albania, but nothing in the country where I come from, in the mountains or the trees or the sea and the land, says that that country is Albania, or the country where we are standing is Belgium. But when I crossed the border yesterday, they asked me many questions about why I'm here, because we all believe in the states of Albania and Belgium, and these two objects that I have behind me are just a piece of cloth and a piece of paper that actually have no value. But the value that they get is because of the meaning that we impose upon them. Stories come from everywhere. They come from our families, from our cultures, from school, from nations. And coming from Albania, I saw what stories mean for humans. I was born in Albania shortly after the fall of the Albanian dictatorship. And I saw that stories can create realities. My parents talk about their upbringing and growing up in a dictatorship system, and they talk about training for a military invasion from Italy and France and Europe and the United States, and these were enemies that were not even planning to invade us. When there was a shortage of food in Albania, the party invented this idea that eating fish with cheese is poisonous, so my parents don't eat it, and even I to this day don't eat it because I have this idea in my mind. Also, Albania is in the Balkans, in South Europe, where we are a bunch of countries that are so similar, but we hate each other because of the stories that we tell about each other. And these stories usually originate from the Yugoslav wars. As a communication designer, I wanted to do something about this, and I knew that there was something in storytelling, and I found that games are unique. When we think about games, we think about the entertainment and the value that they give us, but we forget that games are a medium. They're a medium of storytelling, a medium of communication, and a medium of art. And they're unique because it's the only medium in which the audience is active in the process. So when we read a book or when we watch a film, we are passive. We are just accepting information as a given. In a game, we are key to the story, and we affect the story and the world around us. And I wanted to explore this more. So I was not a game designer. I had studied design, but I saw that games could have a lot of potential. So I studied games, and the game designer Jane McGonigal, she defines 4 traits of a game to be the goal, the rules, the feedback, and the voluntary participation. With the first 3 game designers, maybe a lot of you are in the room, we kind of know that the goal is like the purpose that the player has, the rules set the limits and what the player can do and cannot do, the feedback shows to the player how close they are to reaching their goal. But for me, the most interesting was this idea of voluntary participation, which means that the game can only exist if the player accepts the goal, the rules, and the feedback. So with this in mind, I wanted to use it as a metaphor, and I compared my favorite video game at the time, Papers, Please, with the Albanian dictatorship. And I started to see how the Albanian dictatorship was built on kind of the same basis. So the goal of Albanians was to be good communists, and the rules were very simple. They had to cut their hair in a certain way. They couldn't listen to Italian music. The feedback was that they were either promoted in the party or they would go to jail. But the most interesting for me was that the Albanian dictatorship fell in the moment that Albanians didn't accept it anymore. And this is the voluntary participation that we see in all systems that we create. And when I've asked my parents about how was it possible that my parents could accept this very absurd reality, they told me that it looks absurd to me right now, but for them that was the only reality that they had in front of them. They had no other alternative. So looking for how could we create these alternatives, I came into this new philosophy of education called critical pedagogy. So critical pedagogy is a philosophy of education that encourages critical thinking. It's different from the banking methods, so our traditional way of education. It is mainly created by a Brazilian educator called Paulo Freire, and it is based on a few pillars. So in critical pedagogy, the learner is active, so the learner is interacting with the information, they are exploring information, and in this way they become more aware of their context and identity. The teacher is no longer seen as a powerful force on top of us that gives information as the ultimate truth, but is a collaborator in exploring and finding information. And finally, critical pedagogy allows for different perspectives and allows students to embody these different perspectives and look at alternatives to their own realities. And in this way, it promotes dialogue. So in 2018, in my final year of my bachelor studies in design, I created my first board game propaganda, and it was inspired, or some might say kind of like a rip-off of Monopoly, but I used the same rules and ideas of power and establishing power in response to what was happening at the time, which was close to two key events, the election of Donald Trump and Brexit in the United Kingdom, which is where I was studying. And I saw that these two events were very polarizing and dividing. There was one camp or the other, there was no in between. And I created this game in response to that, and it captured the idea of post-truth, which was the era that we were living in, according to Oxford University. And in the game, it's made for 5 players, and everybody has a different perspective, political perspective, religious, scientific, marketing, and they play to make their truth absolute and gain followers, and to silence the other perspectives. And everything that was happening in our world at the time, I turned it into these boost and hitch cards that would give you or take away followers, like you become a meme and you gain followers because people are talking about you, or a BuzzFeed article was written against you so you lose followers. And what was the most interesting to me was seeing people play it in real life, and I saw that my players were kind of going out of their own experiences and their own bodies and embodying these other perspectives and forgetting about what they already knew. And they were more open to experiencing something else. And in particular, I played it with a Serbian player. And for the first time, we could talk about the war in Kosovo without pointing fingers of, you are an enemy, now you are an enemy. And in fact, the whole game, this idea of different perspectives, to me came from interviews with people that lived during the Yugoslav wars. So for a few months, I met different individuals from the different sides of the Yugoslav wars, and I asked them the same question about the same war, and I got very contradicting perspectives. In particular, it's the NATO intervention in Kosovo, which the Kosovar participant describes it as the most important event, and he says that when he saw the planes coming towards Serbia, he felt relief. But for the Serbian participant, that meant the death of his neighbors and the destruction of his home. For me, it was important to see that these two participants, no matter who held the most absolute truth, they couldn't even imagine that another perspective even existed. And so, inspired by this, I wanted to create an experience based on gameplay to bring to life this idea of multiple perspectives to truth. And this created the first principle of our games at Episod Studio, which is authentic relevance, talking about topics that are happening right now, but looking at conflicts that are real The second game was Dictatura. It was a game prototype that I created with Juliette, who later became the co-founder of Episod Studio. So with Dictatura, with the kind of like the same approach, I started to interview people who lived during the Albanian dictatorship. I interviewed Father Luka Gjergji, who is a priest, and he talked about how he was conducting christening processes in his bathtub because religion was banned in Albania. And also Shamsi, who was the character that really touched me. And he talked about how he was listening to Italian music illegally in Albania. And when the party found out, they put him in prison for 10 years. So based on his story, we started to create his experience, and he drew this sketch behind me of how he was making the DIY antennas with cans and wires and sticks to put it outside his window and get and track Italian radio waves. And we translated it in a level of the game for players to actually build the antenna. And we have a small trailer for this. I think there's no sound. Yeah, it's missing sound. Okay, I'm gonna start from. Okay. So when I first created the concept for Dictatura, for me it was clear that it was a story about the Albanian dictatorship that maybe we don't really talk about that much. And in my head I created it as this experience where you start as the secretary of the party and you are spying on your neighbors and you open all of their folders. And each folder transports you into the memory of each, into the story of each of the characters based on the real people and the real stories of the Albanian dictatorship. But after testing it with players, it became clear to me that the most important part, except for telling these true stories and navigating this very sad history of Albania, was actually the individual experience, so the player experience. And now we are exploring the game to be more of an open world game that is going to be focused on the experience of the player, and maybe it's not even going to be based in Albania but inspired by it. But we really want players to feel what it would feel like to live in a dictatorship. And this gave us the second principle of our game, which is player-centric storytelling and building a game and an experience that starts from the player. The third game that we created, and actually the game that we are focusing more right now, is Race for the Arctic. So Race for the Arctic tells the story of the final frontier on Earth, the Arctic. When we think about climate change in the Arctic, we usually think about polar bears on shrinking ice, which is a very sad view. But what is actually happening in the Arctic is that with the ice melting, there are new shipping routes opening up, and there is economic opportunities, but also displacement and conflict. So in the game, you play as a journalist in 2075, and you are trying to find out what happened to your grandfather, Noah Freight. Noah Freight was a shipping pioneer who transported cargo across, the Arctic for 50 years. He rose to fame and then disappeared. And you use his logbook to follow his routes and to find his stories. And when you reach some key moments, you open. I'm going to stop touching this. When you reach certain points, you open his memories and you solve puzzles to complete the story. And all of these stories in the memories are based on real characters again, of the people who live and work in the Arctic that we are working with. It includes Tomasie, who is an Inuit game designer, Tahni, who is a researcher at the intersection of climate change and feminism. And now we are building, the level that we are building right now is with Liviu Ivanescu, who is an astronomer working in the northernmost telescope in the world, and he's building climate models. And with our collaborators, we have a participatory narrative design process because we want them to feel part of our game design process. which starts with we interview them to find their stories, to know who they are, and to find the key points of interest. Then we do a creative workshop in which we invite our collaborators to start thinking about how to represent their personal story, but also their findings in our game, and then we implement it. And after talking with all of our collaborators from across the Arctic Circle, it has become clear the need for an Arctic treaty. So there is an Antarctic treaty that protects the Antarctic and sees it as a place for scientific collaboration. And our collaborators talk about the need for this Arctic treaty, and together we are building kind of a research case for the Arctic, and we want to lead our players towards signing a petition for this Arctic treaty. And this gives us the third principle of our games. We want that through our games to have real-world impact. We are exploring how can we take our games from an entertaining experience towards impacting the world around them. And with these three, together with Juliette, we have started Episod Studio. And the big question, is she going to make any money with this? And I'm going to talk a little bit about the other side of creativity and the fact that for the past few months, I have done less game design and more spreadsheets and recruiting. And I'm going to share only my experience, and we're still kind of new in the industry. So I am very open to questions and criticism in this part. But what I am doing is that I am treating Episod as a company rather than a project after project. At the moment, we are bootstrapping to achieve product market fit, which means we are trying to find out, is there a market for this kind of games? I believe there is because of the data and where the industry stands right now. But the most important is to build the best products for our audience. So we are currently being funded by grants, which for those that don't know, it's basically free money that you don't have to give back. And we have received 2 grants, one from the UK Games Fund and the second one from R-Stroke Foundation for Climate Games. And we were also finalists for the Terra Carta Design Lab from King Charles in the UK. And the grants that we are focusing more are game grants, which is where we've had the most success, but also diversity grants, climate grants, and creative grants. And with this, we are building, with the first grant, we built the first 2 prototypes of the game, and now we're going to build the level of the game. And then we are exploring 2 different routes. The first one is the traditional game route, to go to a publisher to release the first title, and then go on the second title. But I am also excited to explore the investment route, to go to angel investors. And we've already found one, and we're looking for another one. And then we're either going to go to a venture capitalist or sales, hopefully, in the end. And the plan is to release our first game, Race for the Arctic, by 2025. And then continuing the second 2 titles by 2028. And obviously, for those that make games, we know that the process is very long and sometimes it takes detours that you don't anticipate. So we are, trying to reach these milestones. And at the same time, we are doing partnership projects. For example, we built a digital exhibition for the Young V&A Museum in London, which explored how kids played during the pandemic. And for us, it was interesting to apply game ideas into a digital exhibition. That usually, when we think about a digital exhibition, it's walking in a room that kind of replicates the same way that we do it in our physical world. At the same time, we are focusing on kind of connecting to our community to find who are our players, who are our main audiences. And in January, we tested with no marketing budget this thing called Episod Talks, kind of like a webinar style event for a few days, in which we invited our collaborators in the Arctic to talk about their research. And alongside our team, was talking about the development of Race for the Arctic. And with no marketing budget, we had 200 registrations, and 100 of them joined our newsletter. So we plan to run a few more of these with real budget. And the last thing I'm going to talk about is the team. I don't know how many of you here come more from the cultural sector than games, but the naive mistake that I made in the beginning was to think that designing games is easy, and it's really not. So when we started with the team, we were thinking that, yeah, we are designers, communicators, and we can just, make something interactive and fun, and it's going to work. But then it started to really feel like, when an architect is trying to build a bridge and they design the best and the most, mind-blowing bridge, but then in the end you need engineers to make it work. So it's the same thing. Now, in our team, we have brought Harvey, who is a game designer and programmer, and Duncan, who is a narrative designer, but also keeping the same structure of the team with the researcher and the creative strategies, because I really want to foster this multidisciplinarity in the team. And we also work with consultants to help us drive our vision forward. And what brings us all together, despite our backgrounds and our expertise, is that we all believe in the power of play. We believe that through play, we could bring to life voices that are often unheard and silenced. Through play, we can appeal to audiences from any background. And most importantly, through play, we can translate information in a way that fosters dialogue instead of division. And that is the end of my talk. Thank you.
Thank you, Cindy, for that very inspiring presentation. Is there any question in the audience? No? That was clear, interesting. Yeah. So maybe just one question. What's the main part of the effort on developing game design regarding to scenarios and input of content, research, and so on? What's the 50%, 30%?
That's a good question, because I've never thought about it in terms of percentage, and maybe I should now, because how we do it. So now in Race for the Arctic, for example, it is clear for us that it starts with the collaborator. So we interview Liviu, our astronomer collaborator. We are first doing the interview, and that takes one day. And then we run a workshop that usually takes also one day, but sometimes it can take two, depending on if the game designer and the narrative designer don't feel like they have enough content. And then it goes into the development team for them to design, to create an experience that is going to appeal to players, because we really don't want it to feel like a lecture in the end. And then the final part, and the most important, is that after the level is prototyped to a place that we feel like it's ready to test, the first tester is the collaborator. So we take it to them, and then it's another open discussion to see, have we represented their personal story accurately? Have we represented data accurately? And then when they say the final yes, then we finalize it. So I guess it takes obviously more to develop, but it is really crucial to finish these first steps first.
Okay, thank you. I see a powerful social engineering to change behavior. Do you plan to assess the impact on behavior?
Yes. Yeah, so that is I think the biggest challenge, but also it is the most important for us, because we really want to see if our games are having the impact that we want them to have, and then how can we multiply it and replicate it. And now we are working, so the R-Stroke Foundation that we won the grant from, we are also doing training with them to see exactly how can we have impact and then how to measure it.
Okay, thank you. Any question? Yeah, two.
I was wondering, like, since you're tackling like these like hard issues and complex like stories, how do you plan on reaching players who are maybe not yet like that don't have like a sensitivity for that kind of story, like don't.
Yes, that is something that we are trying to figure out right now, which is the very, very early stage of development. Because I think there are two main concerns that we have. The first one is that we don't want to be insensitive. And the second one, we don't want to promote radicalism, which is the opposite side. And I think the main thing that we are going to do right now is to do a lot of testing, and we want, depending on funding, we want to bring a community manager that is actually going to create this structure for finding out how to find these players that are either not coming to us because of, cultural insensitivity, but also how can we stop radicalism on the other side. So I think it's something that we are exploring, but I think it's a lot of testing and creating community guidelines and making our players feel safe in the community.
Hello. My question is a little related. It's more about how difficult do you find it to do your communication since you have a very creative, more unique creative process compared to most studios, and since it's very engaged socially and politically. How difficult do you find it to communicate that to both your players? So how do you handle the communication to your players, but also to publishers? How do you think that are they open to it now, or
Yes.
less so?
It's a very good question, because I think, I don't know why it feels like players are easier to understand these kind of topics, and that's where we are focusing right now more. Obviously, there is a lot of, back and forth with players. Like, for example, the Dictatura game, I posted it on itch.io, just the first prototype to test it. And then I had written about how it was built on the Albanian dictatorship and no mention of communism or Russia. But somebody took it and posted it on a Russian forum that really butchered us and destroyed our game. And so it's a kind of anticipating and again testing with players. When it comes to publishers, there was always this connotation of no publisher is going to take this game. But when we were at GDC with my co-founder, when she went to GDC, she talked to narrative-driven publishers like Whitethorn Games or Raw Fury. And they already know this market of players that are looking for meaningful experiences. The only question we have before we sign with a publisher is always going to be how much they are going to kind of affect the story and the impact we want to have based on their own, their own interests. And that's why I'm trying to figure out whether a self-publishing route is better for us. But I think, yes, there are publishers that want to publish meaningful games.
Okay, thank you. Any other question? No? So, last one.
It's more a technical question. Where are you in the process of the development of the game?
Of Race for the Arctic?
Yeah.
So Race for the Arctic, we built 2 prototypes. Not a waste of time, obviously, but now learning and testing from the first prototype, we are maybe pre-production, but also maybe production. So we are building 1 level of the game with Liviu, the astronomer, and we want to release it for players. So I don't know if it's a vertical slice or not really, but we want it to be kind of like the game, to be able to show it to players and also publishers. So it's like, yeah, production.
Okay, thank you. If there's no additional question, we will end here. That was very inspiring. Thank you, Cindy.
Thank you.
And next presentation in half an hour at 11. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you, everyone. Thank you.